8 interceptions. That is the number Deshaun Watson has thrown across 9 practices of Cleveland Browns training camp. Shedeur Sanders has thrown 4, exactly half. Same practices, same defensive looks, same coaching staff watching every single rep. And yet somehow, the rookie with half the turnovers is the one getting every single mistake plastered across every single beat writer feed in Cleveland, while the veteran with double the interceptions quietly gets a pass from half the reporters standing on that same sideline. That is not an opinion. That is a documented, tracked, and verified pattern that has played out identically across this entire stretch of camp. And today, right here on Gridiron Ground, we are going to lay every single number on the table, break down the actual film that most channels are either ignoring or spinning, and expose a coverage imbalance so consistent and so measurable that by the time this video is over, you will never look at a Cleveland Browns practice report the same way again. This is not about rooting for one quarterback over another. This is about honesty. This is about the numbers telling a story that certain people covering this team do not seem interested in telling. Now, before we go any further, drop a football emoji in the comments right now if you think the quarterback with fewer interceptions deserves at least equal coverage. Just a football emoji, nothing else. Let me see who is actually paying attention. Before moving further, we're pushing for 1,000 subscribers here at Gridiron Ground. If you're enjoying our Browns and Shedeur Sanders coverage, hit that subscribe button and be part of the journey. Let's build this community together. Here is the thing about quarterback competitions that drives fans absolutely crazy. Everyone has an opinion, but almost nobody wants to sit down and actually do the math. So let us do the math right now, because these numbers deserve to breathe without anybody spinning them in one direction or another. Across 9 full practices of this training camp, Shedeur Sanders has completed passes at a higher rate than Deshaun Watson. That is not a cherry-picked single-day snapshot. That is the cumulative picture across every documented session of this entire camp. Watson has attempted significantly more total passes than Shedeur across this stretch, which on the surface should give him a built-in advantage when it comes to stacking up positive counting stats. More throws means more chances to connect, more chances to find open receivers, more chances to put touchdowns on the board. And yet, even with that volume cushion working in his favor, Watson still comes out behind Shedeur in completion percentage when you look at the full body of work, rather than isolating one specific practice. Now let us talk about the interception numbers, because this is where the gap between perception and reality becomes genuinely difficult to ignore. Watson currently sits at 8 interceptions across 9 practices. Shedeur sits at 4. That is a 2-to-1 ratio favoring the rookie. And here is the mathematical exercise that should make every single person evaluating this competition sit up a little straighter. If Watson had been given the exact same number of pass attempts that Shedeur has gotten across this camp and maintained his current interception rate, the projection lands somewhere around 10 or more interceptions across that same window. 10. That is not a minor difference. That is a fundamentally different story about who is actually protecting the football and who is putting it in danger. But there is another layer to this that deserves attention, because it changes the entire complexion of Watson's statistical profile. A significant chunk of his touchdown production came from one single practice session. One day where the team apparently ran heavy red zone work, and Watson went off for 7 scores in that specific controlled environment. Strip that single outlier session out of his numbers, and the week-to-week version of Watson's quarterback play looks dramatically less impressive than the raw cumulative touchdown total would suggest. That is not a knock on Watson for performing well in a favorable practice setup.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Where credit is due, he put up points when the opportunity was there. But it is absolutely a reason to pump the brakes on anyone using his total touchdown count as proof that he has been the better quarterback across this entire camp. Because that total is heavily inflated by one specific session that was structurally designed to generate scoring opportunities in the first place. And if you are someone who watches Gridiron Ground because you want the actual full picture instead of whatever narrative happens to be trending on social media that day, do yourself a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button, because this channel is not going to cherry-pick the stats that make one guy look good and bury the ones that make another guy look bad. Every number gets put on the table here, every single time. That is the Gridiron Ground standard, and it is not changing. Here is one more statistical detail worth chewing on before we move forward. On today's practice alone, Shedeur finished 9 of 15 with 1 interception. Watson went 13 of 23 with 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. Quick glance at those lines and you might think Watson had the better day because of the 2 scores, but look at the completion rates. Shedeur completed 60% of his passes. Watson completed just over 56%. And Watson needed 8 more pass attempts to produce his stat line. More volume, lower efficiency, and the exact same number of interceptions as the rookie on the day. That is not a dominant veteran performance. That is a veteran being outperformed on a per-attempt basis by a player who has been in an NFL system for a fraction of the time Watson has. There is a trait that separates quarterbacks who survive in this league from quarterbacks who eventually get replaced, and it has almost nothing to do with arm strength or completion percentage or any of the numbers we just broke down. It is about trajectory within a game, within a single drive, within a single half of football. Some quarterbacks start sharp and fade. Some quarterbacks stay flat from the first snap to the last. And some quarterbacks, the ones coaching staffs genuinely fall in love with, start slow and then get better as the pressure builds and the reps stack up. That heating up pattern is exactly what Shedeur Sanders has shown across this entire training camp. Practice after practice, the documented trend is the same. Shedeur might come out a little uneven in the early portion of a session. Maybe a throw sails on him. Maybe a timing route does not connect cleanly. But as that practice progresses, as the defense settles in and starts throwing more complex looks at him, Shedeur consistently finds another gear. His accuracy tightens. His decision-making sharpens. His confidence visibly builds in a way that shows up not just in...
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
The stats, but in the actual body language and tempo of the offense around him. That is not a coincidence happening over and over again across 9 separate practices. That is a real identifiable pattern that tells you something genuinely meaningful about how this quarterback is wired. Now contrast that with what Deshaun Watson has shown across the same stretch. Watson has been genuinely inconsistent, not just practice to practice, which would be somewhat understandable for a quarterback working his way back from serious injuries and significant time away from competitive football, but within the same single session. There have been documented instances where Watson looks sharp for a stretch of throws, builds some momentum, and then immediately gives it back with a turnover or a sequence of inaccurate passes that kills whatever rhythm the offense was building. That kind of internal inconsistency is a much harder problem to solve than a quarterback who simply starts slow and builds. Because starting slow and building tells you the player has an internal mechanism for self-correction, for reading what the defense is giving him and adjusting in real time. Watson's inconsistency suggests that mechanism either is not functioning the way it used to or has not fully returned yet after everything he has been through physically and mentally over the past few years. And here is why this specific distinction matters so much more than people are giving it credit for. Think about what a coaching staff is actually trying to project when they evaluate a quarterback competition in training camp. They are not just asking who looks best right now in this specific controlled practice environment. They are asking who do we trust to drive this offense in the fourth quarter of a close game in November. Who do we trust to take the ball with 3 minutes left and a 3-point deficit and methodically move the chains under real pressure with real consequences? The quarterback who heats up as the stakes rise is the answer to that question almost every single time. The quarterback who fluctuates unpredictably within a single low-pressure practice session is the one who gives a coaching staff nightmares when they try to project that performance into a real game environment. Dillon Gabriel adds another interesting data point to this conversation because his trajectory pattern appears to be the inverse of Shedeur's. Reports suggest Gabriel tends to come out sharp early in a practice and then cool off as the session progresses. That is not a disqualifying trait by any means. Some quarterbacks are simply wired to be at their sharpest when things are fresh and the playbook is operating at its cleanest. But in terms of pure projection value for high-leverage late-game situations, that cooling off...
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Tendency is a real concern relative to what Shedeur has demonstrated in those same windows of practice. There is a historical precedent for this kind of evaluation too. Think about the quarterbacks across NFL history who have been genuinely elite in the fourth quarter and overtime situations. Almost universally, those players shared this exact trait. They got better as the game went on. They fed off the mounting pressure rather than wilting under it. That does not mean Shedeur Sanders is guaranteed to be an elite fourth quarter performer at the NFL level. Training camp is not the regular season and practice reps are not playoff pressure. But the underlying wiring, the tendency to improve rather than deteriorate as reps accumulate, is exactly the kind of foundational trait that translates. Now let us get into something that happened on today's practice field that deserves its own dedicated conversation, because it directly impacts how we evaluate Shedeur Sanders, and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything Shedeur himself did wrong. Let us talk about Malachi Corley, because what showed up on film today was genuinely concerning for reasons that go way beyond one bad practice. Shedeur pushed the ball downfield to Corley on multiple occasions today, and this was not a case of a young quarterback sailing throws into double coverage and hoping for the best. The ball placement on these deep attempts was legitimately strong, right in the bucket, giving Corley every opportunity to high-point the football, secure the catch, and turn upfield for real yardage. The kind of throws that should show up on a highlight reel at the end of a productive day. Instead, they showed up as incompletions. Because Corley simply did not come down with the football. Not once, multiple times, on throws that were placed well enough to be caught. That is a drops problem, pure and simple, and it deserves to be called out directly and honestly because the downstream effect of those drops on public perception is something most people are not thinking about carefully enough. Here is what happens when a quarterback puts a beautiful deep ball right on his receiver's hands, and that receiver drops it. The stat sheet records an incompletion for the quarterback. The completion percentage takes a hit, and anyone scanning the box score without watching the actual film walks away thinking the quarterback had a rough day throwing the ball downfield. That is exactly the kind of distortion that makes training camp evaluation so tricky and so dependent on actually watching what happened rather than just reading about it after the fact. Shedeur did his job on those throws, period. The fact that they did not result in completions is not his burden to carry in this evaluation. And here is where this connects to a bigger roster construction question that the coaching staff is going to have to answer before the regular season starts. If you are Gridiron Ground family, and I know you are because you are still watching, you already understand that this channel digs deeper than the surface-level narratives. So let us dig. Malachi Corley is fighting for a roster spot. That is not speculation. That is the reality.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Of being a young receiver on a team that has invested real resources at the position and needs every single player at that spot to justify their place on the 53-man roster through consistent performance. Drops on catchable balls are the single fastest way to lose a coaching staff's confidence, because drops are not a physical limitation that coaching can fix. Drops are a concentration and reliability issue that either resolves itself quickly or becomes a defining characteristic that follows a player throughout his career. One rough day does not end a career. Every receiver in the history of the NFL has had practices where the ball just would not stick. But the timing of these drops could not be worse for Corley specifically, because they come during a stretch of camp where every single rep is being evaluated with roster cut decisions looming. And they come on throws where the quarterback gave him every chance to succeed, which means the coaching staff cannot even partially excuse the miss by pointing to a difficult throw or a tight coverage window. The ball was there. He did not catch it. That is the beginning and the end of that conversation from a coaching evaluation standpoint. Now subscribe to Gridiron Ground right now if you want to keep tracking whether Corley bounces back from today, or whether this becomes the kind of recurring pattern that puts his roster spot in genuine jeopardy. Because we are going to follow this storyline all the way through final cuts with the same honesty and the same level of detail you are getting right now. Every training camp produces at least one player who nobody was talking about heading into the summer, and everybody is talking about by the time the preseason games start. For the 2025 Cleveland Browns, that player is Emmanuel McNeal Warren. And what this rookie safety is doing on the practice field right now is not just impressive for a late-round pick or impressive for a first-year player. It is impressive by any standard you want to apply to any player at any experience level on this entire roster. 2 interceptions on Shedeur Sanders in a single week of camp. Let that specific detail settle for a moment, because the significance of it gets lost if you just treat it as another line in a practice report. This is a rookie defensive back making repeated game-changing plays on a quarterback who, as we have already documented with actual numbers, has been the most efficient passer in this entire camp. Picking off the hottest hand in the competition is not something that happens by accident. And picking him off twice in 7 days is not something that happens because the quarterback is playing poorly. It happens because the defensive player is reading, anticipating, and executing at an elite level relative to his experience. Let us break down what actually makes Warren's interception today so impressive from a pure football standpoint. This was not a case of a quarterback throwing the ball directly to a defender standing in a zone. Warren read Shedeur's eyes before the ball left his hand. He identified the intended target. He broke on the route. And then he covered real legitimate ground across the field to arrive at the catch point before the receiver could. That combination of pre-snap recognition, post-snap anticipation, and pure closing speed is the holy trinity of safety play at the NFL level. You can coach technique. You can teach scheme. But that instinctive ability to process information in real time and then physically execute on that processing within a fraction of a second is something that either lives inside a player's DNA or it does not. Warren has it. And he is showing it against live competition in a real NFL environment, not against lesser talent in a college conference where the speed differential might partially explain the results. The draft capital conversation around this kid is genuinely fascinating too. Warren was selected later in his draft class than his talent level arguably warranted. And every single day of this training camp is adding another piece of evidence to the case that multiple teams passed on a player who is going to make them regret it for years to come. The Browns got a steal. That much is becoming clearer with every practice report. But the degree of the steal is what makes this story so compelling. We are not talking about a late-round pick who might develop into a serviceable rotational piece over the next 2 or 3 years. We are talking about a player who is flashing starter-level instincts and playmaking ability right now, in his very first training camp, against quarterbacks who are being evaluated for the starting job. And here is the broader secondary picture that makes Warren's emergence even more exciting. Denzel Ward picked off Watson today in the same practice where Warren picked off Shedeur. That means this defensive backfield is generating turnovers from multiple positions simultaneously, which is exactly the kind of depth and versatility that turns a good defense into an elite one. When opposing offensive coordinators sit down to game plan against Cleveland this fall, they are not going to be able to scheme around one specific playmaker in the secondary. They are going to have to account for multiple legitimate ball hawks at multiple levels of the defense. That is a nightmare scenario for any quarterback facing this unit. Now we need to have a conversation that goes beyond the football itself, because what is happening off the field in the media coverage of this quarterback competition is just as important as what is happening on it. And the numbers behind this specific pattern are so stark and so consistent that ignoring them at this point would be journalistically irresponsible regardless of which quarterback you personally want to see start in Week 1. Here is the documented reality across 9 practices of training camp. Every single time Shedeur Sanders throws an interception, every single beat writer covering the Cleveland Browns posts a clip of it. Every single one. If there are 10 reporters on that sideline with cameras, all 10 clips go up, without exception. When Deshaun Watson throws an interception, roughly half of those same reporters post a clip, 5 out of 10 at best. Same field, same practice. Same play happening in real time right in front of the same group of people. And yet the coverage output is dramatically, measurably different depending on which quarterback made the mistake. 4 interceptions for Shedeur across 9 practices. All 4 clipped and posted by every single beat writer present. 8 interceptions for Watson across those same 9 practices. Approximately half of them clipped and posted by roughly half the reporters covering the team. That is not a subtle discrepancy you need advanced analytics to identify. That is a glaring, obvious, repeated imbalance that anyone with basic counting skills can verify for themselves. Now here is where this gets genuinely interesting from a motivation standpoint, because there are multiple possible explanations for why this pattern exists, and not all of them point to the same conclusion. The most generous interpretation is pure engagement economics. A Shedeur Sanders mistake generates clicks and views and comments in a way that a Deshaun Watson mistake apparently does not, or at least did not when this pattern first started establishing itself earlier in camp. Shedeur is the shiny new rookie with a famous father and a polarizing public persona. Content built around his struggles is going to attract attention from both his supporters and his critics, which means higher engagement metrics across the board regardless of whether the audience is watching to agree or to argue. Watson, meanwhile, has been in this league long enough and been through enough public controversy that another training camp interception simply does not move the needle the same way from a pure content performance standpoint. But here is the wrinkle that undermines even that generous interpretation. The view counts on these Shedeur interception clips have reportedly been declining. Some of them are pulling in only a few hundred views at this point. The audience appetite for this specific category of content appears to be cooling off significantly, which means the economic justification for prioritizing Shedeur's mistakes over Watson's is weakening in real time even as the pattern itself continues unchanged. If the clicks are drying up but the behavior persists, you have to start asking whether this has moved beyond strategic content decisions and into something closer to habitual reflexive bias. A pattern that built itself during a period of high engagement and then simply never got reevaluated even as the underlying engagement data shifted. The downstream effect on public perception is the part that should concern everyone regardless of their rooting interest. If every Shedeur mistake gets maximum amplification while half of Watson's mistakes get quietly buried, the casual fan scrolling through their feed is going to walk away with a dramatically skewed impression of this competition. They are going to see Shedeur's 4 interceptions treated like a crisis, while Watson's 8 interceptions barely register as a storyline. And over time, That skewed impression hardens into a consensus narrative that feels true simply because it has been repeated so often and so loudly, even though the actual underlying numbers tell a completely different story. There is a moment from the tail end of today's practice that perfectly illustrates one of the most frustrating dynamics in quarterback evaluation. And unless you actually watched the full sequence unfold, you probably came away with exactly the wrong impression of what happened. During a 2-minute drill period, Shedeur Sanders was driving the offense down the field. The sequence was building real momentum. Completions were connecting. The chains were moving. The kind of methodical, purposeful drive that looks exactly like what you want from your starting quarterback when the clock is running down and every play matters. And then Shedeur Sanders had the ball punched out. A fumble, at the worst possible moment. Right as that drive was approaching the point where it could have converted into real points, or at the very least a significant chunk of positive yardage that would have capped an efficient day of work for Shedeur in the most visible and high-pressure portion of practice. Instead, the drive ended on a turnover that had absolutely nothing to do with the quarterback's decision-making, accuracy, or pocket presence on any of the preceding plays. Now here is the evaluation problem this creates. If you are a casual observer reading a practice summary, and you see that Shedeur's 2-minute drill ended with a fumble, your brain automatically associates that negative outcome with the quarterback. That is just how human psychology works when it comes to football. The quarterback gets credit for touchdowns and blame for turnovers regardless of who actually caused them. But in this specific case, the fumble was a running back mistake. The ball was punched out of a ball carrier's hands. Shedeur did not throw an interception. Shedeur did not take a sack that led to a strip. Shedeur drove the offense efficiently and then watched a teammate's mistake erase all of that work in a single play. This kind of outcome contamination is one of the most underappreciated problems in training camp quarterback evaluation, and it cuts both ways. Watson scored a touchdown on his own 2-minute drill in that same window of practice, which is absolutely a positive mark on his ledger for the day. Credit where credit is due. But even that Watson touchdown has to be evaluated in the context of what was happening elsewhere on the field. If Shedeur's 2-minute drill had not been cut short by a fumble he did not cause, there is a real possibility that drive ends in points too. And suddenly, the 2-minute drill portion of today's practice looks like a wash between the two quarterbacks rather than a clear Watson win. This is exactly why context matters so much more than outcomes when you are trying to evaluate quarterback play in a practice setting. Outcomes are noisy. They include dropped passes and fumbles and defensive penalties and special teams mistakes and 100 other variables that have nothing to do with the quarterback's actual performance on a given play. The quarterback's actual job, reading the defense, making the right decision, delivering an accurate ball on time to the right target, can be executed perfectly and still result in a negative outcome because of something that happens after the ball leaves his hands or after the play design has already been executed correctly. Shedeur executed his portion of that 2-minute drill well. The outcome did not reflect his execution, and any honest evaluation of today's practice has to account for that gap, rather than lazily lumping the fumble into Shedeur's column simply because it happened while the offense was in his hands. This also connects back to the Malachi Corley discussion from earlier in a way that reinforces the same fundamental point. Multiple deep balls today were placed accurately by Shedeur and dropped by his receiver. A 2-minute drill was driven efficiently by Shedeur and ended by his running back's fumble. Add those plays together, and you are looking at a significantly different statistical day for Shedeur than the raw numbers currently reflect. A day where his completion percentage would have been higher, his yardage totals would have been bigger, and his 2-minute drill would have ended with points instead of a turnover. Let us zoom all the way out now because individual practices only mean so much when you are trying to identify real patterns versus random noise. 9 practices of data is not a full season. It is not even a full preseason, but it is enough of a sample to start drawing some preliminary conclusions that carry real weight, especially when those conclusions are backed by consistent trends rather than isolated one-off performances. Across this entire 9-practice stretch, Shedeur Sanders has been the most efficient passer in this quarterback competition by completion percentage. He has thrown the fewest interceptions of any quarterback who has seen significant work. He has demonstrated a consistent pattern of improving as practices progress, which projects favorably to late-game performance in real regular season situations. And he has done all of this while receiving fewer total pass attempts than Deshaun Watson, which means his efficiency numbers are not being inflated by volume the way Watson's counting stats potentially are. Watson, by contrast, has thrown double the interceptions Shedeur has thrown across the same stretch. His completion percentage trails Shedeur's despite having more opportunities to accumulate positive stats. His touchdown total is heavily concentrated in one specific practice that was structurally designed to produce scoring opportunities. And his consistency pattern within individual sessions has been genuinely concerning, with documented stretches of sharp play followed immediately by stretches of real regression within the same practice. Now add the media coverage layer on top of those football evaluation layers, because this is where the full picture becomes genuinely difficult to reconcile with the public narrative that has developed around this competition. An anonymous league survey reportedly ranked Shedeur dead last among evaluated quarterbacks despite the body of work we have just documented. Beat writers have consistently amplified every single Shedeur mistake, while letting approximately half of Watson's mistakes pass without equivalent coverage. And the casual fan consuming this coverage without access to the full practice data is walking away with an impression of this competition that does not match what is actually happening on the field. If you are part of the Gridiron Ground family, and I am talking directly to you right now, you already know this channel exists specifically to close that gap between perception and reality. We do not pick a narrative and then find stats to support it. We lay out the stats, we watch the film, and we let the evidence tell us what story actually deserves to be told. That is why subscribing to this channel matters. Not because we need your numbers, although we appreciate every single one of you, but because you deserve a source that respects your intelligence enough to give you the full picture and let you draw your own conclusions. The pattern recognition element of this conversation is something that deserves emphasis because it is the single strongest piece of evidence supporting the argument that something structural is happening in how this competition is being covered. One practice with a coverage imbalance could be a coincidence. 2 practices could be an anomaly. But 9 consecutive practices showing the same consistent pattern of disproportionate coverage, favoring Watson's narrative over Shedeur's despite the underlying numbers favoring Shedeur, is not something you can dismiss as random chance. That is a trend, and trends demand explanations that go beyond shrugging and saying, well, maybe they just missed it. Whether that explanation is economic, habitual, or something deeper is a question each person watching this video can answer for themselves. But the existence of the pattern itself is no longer debatable. It is documented, it is measured, and it is consistent across every single practice we have tracked. Everything we have broken down today, the numbers, the film, the heating up pattern, the coverage gap, ultimately funnels into one single question that matters more than all of it combined. Who is going to start for the Cleveland Browns in Week 1? And while none of us sitting outside that building can say with certainty what the coaching staff is thinking behind closed doors, the evidence from this camp is building a case that becomes harder and harder to argue against with each passing practice. If you are the Browns coaching staff, and you are sitting in a room right now with all 9 practices worth of data spread out in front of you, here is what you are looking at. You have a rookie quarterback who has been more efficient than your veteran across every meaningful statistical category, except raw touchdown total. And even that touchdown gap largely disappears when you adjust for the one outlier red zone practice that inflated Watson's numbers. You have a rookie who gets better as practices go on versus a veteran who fluctuates unpredictably within single sessions. You have a rookie with half the interceptions thrown on fewer total attempts. And you have a rookie whose mistakes are being amplified at double the rate of the veterans by the media covering your team, which means the external pressure to start the veteran is being artificially inflated by a coverage pattern that does not reflect what is actually happening on your practice field. That is a genuinely difficult position for a coaching staff to be in, because starting the rookie means going against the established media narrative, absorbing the inevitable criticism from every commentator and analyst who has been fed a steady diet of Shedeur interception clips without equivalent Watson interception clips, and betting on a player who has never taken a regular season NFL snap. Starting the veteran means ignoring your own practice data, overlooking a 2-to-1 interception disadvantage, and hoping that the version of Watson who showed up for that one explosive red zone practice is the real Watson rather than the inconsistent version who has shown up for the other 8. The defensive side of this equation adds another layer of complexity, with players like Emmanuel McNeal Warren emerging as legitimate playmakers and Denzel Ward continuing to produce interceptions at a high rate. This defense has the potential to be genuinely elite. That changes the calculus for the quarterback position, because a dominant defense lowers the bar for what the offense needs to produce on a weekly basis. You do not need your quarterback to win shootouts if your defense is consistently generating turnovers and limiting opposing scoring. You need your quarterback to protect the football, manage the game intelligently, and avoid the kind of costly mistakes that put your defense in impossible positions. Based on every single piece of evidence from this camp, Shedeur Sanders is currently the quarterback better suited to that specific role. Roster construction decisions beyond the quarterback position are also looming. Malachi Corley's drop issues are going to factor into final cut discussions. The secondary depth that Warren and Ward are showcasing together is going to influence how aggressively the coaching staff can afford to play on defense. And every single one of these decisions interconnects with the quarterback choice, because the identity of the starting quarterback shapes how the entire roster around him gets built and deployed. Here is where we land after everything we have covered today. The numbers say Shedeur Sanders has been the better quarterback in this competition across 9 practices of training camp. 4 interceptions versus 8, higher completion percentage on fewer attempts, a consistent pattern of improvement within individual sessions that projects directly to the kind of late-game reliability every coaching staff in the NFL is desperately searching for. The film says his deep ball placement has been better than his stat line reflects because receivers, specifically Malachi Corley today, have left real production on the field by failing to finish plays that the quarterback gave them every opportunity to make. The coverage pattern says the public narrative around this competition has been systematically skewed by a documented, measurable imbalance in which mistakes get amplified and which ones get quietly overlooked. And a rookie safety named Emmanuel McNeal Warren says this defense is building something special that could redefine what the Browns need from their quarterback position entirely. None of this means the competition is over. Camp is still ongoing and there are reps left to be evaluated, but the direction of the evidence is clear. And here on Gridiron Ground, we follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere the mainstream coverage does not seem interested in going. Drop your honest take in the comments right now. Who should start week 1 based on what you have seen from this camp? And if this breakdown gave you the full, unfiltered, numbers-backed picture of this competition that you are not getting anywhere else, subscribe to Gridiron Ground and hit that notification bell so you are here for every single update as this race moves toward its conclusion. We are just getting started.